Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Spotlight with Scientists in School. I'm your host, Betty Bakopoulos, and today I am thrilled to be having a conversation with Dr. Gillian Mandich. Dr. Mandich is on a mission to help people live their happiest life. She's a researcher. She's the founder of the International Happiness Institute of Health Science Research. And according to Gillian, there is no secret to happiness, but there is a science to it. She joins us from Toronto. Let's head on over and meet Gillian. Welcome to Spotlight with Scientists in School. I am thrilled to be joined by Dr. Gillian Mandich. Welcome to the show.
Hi there. Thanks so much for having me.
I can only assume that you've been a very busy woman this year with the pandemic upon us and everyone looking for ways to find some happiness. Is that correct?
Yeah, it really is. I think if I would have rewinded, a year just prior to the pandemic, when I told somebody I was a happiness researcher and I studied the science of happiness, there wasn't nearly the same amount of interest, I would say, as now, because now we're all living and breathing mental health, happiness in a totally different way. And so I think that, yes, this topic is more relevant than ever. And it's exciting to be able to bring some science to that conversation.
Oh, this is going to be very exciting. I'm really looking forward to it. But, the question that I always love to ask is more personal. Like when you were a child, did you love science? Did you see this is the path that you were going to take?
I have always loved science. Like when I was really young, I loved doing science experiments. I was always really good at math and science. So my entire childhood growing up, my plan was to go to medical school because at the time I thought if you're good at math and science, then you'd be a doctor. And my horizons had been opened so much more. And I realized that where I'm most passionate is research. And so, yes, sort of the path I thought I was going to take is not this one. Always been passionate about science.
I'm not surprised because I absolutely loved your website. You actually have photographs of report card comments, and they are, those comments I loved back in the day where they were cursive writing, right? They were handwritten notes from your teachers.
Right.
And you have two comments that really stuck out. One said that Gillian is great at research. And I thought, okay, so that was you as a young kid. And the other one that was a really great comment is Gillian participates with happiness. And I thought, look at that. From a young kid, you knew it would be somehow research and happiness, right?
I know, it's so interesting because my mom actually found those when she was cleaning out her basement a couple years ago.
Okay.
And so I thought, just for fun, let's go through and read. And then I was just really taken aback by what was identified when I was young that I don't even remember. And yet that's what the teachers were saying. So it's kind of interesting to sort of reflect back and see what were we interested in as children and how does that evolve?
Absolutely. So you have a very accomplished career. You have a PhD in health science. What made you decide to switch the focus to happiness?
So I've always, the thing I'm most passionate about is health promotion, because I feel like we have one shot at life and I want to know how can we take the best shot possible? How can we use this opportunity to really live our best possible life? And so all of my degrees are in health science, and then health promotion has always been the area within that field that I've been most passionate about. And I used to actually study obesity, childhood obesity. And when I started my PhD, I was still studying childhood obesity, and I was looking at parent and family focused interventions. And about year 2 into your PhD, you do what are called comprehensive exams, this horrible, stressful time where you're given a topic and you basically have to learn everything about it and then have an exam. Yeah. And I started thinking during that time, because I was using BMI as a cutoff for inclusion in my study. So BMI, body mass index, you use height and weight. And I started thinking to myself, I'm using the number on a scale to determine if somebody can be included in my research or not. And I thought, at the same time, you can be overweight and obese and still be healthy. And you can not be overweight and obese and be unhealthy. Okay. So I thought, why am I using weight as the metric that I'm using to determine who's going to be in my research? And so I went to my computer and I started doing literature reviews and literature searches on different health promotion topics and thinking, what else beyond weight could be something that has an impact on our health? And that's how I found happiness research.
Wow.
I didn't know up until that point that people even studied happiness. Yes. And as soon as I realized that, I started reading all of this research that was saying that, happiness and health are highly correlated. And when people are happier, they tend to be healthier. And it's connected to so many different health outcomes. And so I completely switched gears. It was a difficult time because it's really hard 2 years into a 4-year program to sit down to your supervisor and say, I want to completely shift my topic. At the same time, I really realized that whatever I want to do with my whole heart, and I want it to be something that's meaningful to me. And so it was something I had to do. It ended up adding a year onto my studies. So it took me 5 years, but it was totally worth it. And I think it's just such an exciting and really growing field now too.
I talk about that with my kids sometimes. They think, oh, I'm going to do this. It's going to take an extra year. And it seems like a big deal at the moment. And then you look back and I'm sure you're happy that you made that decision, right?
It's so true. And to your point, I remember thinking at the time, it was this very daunting thing. Another year? I've already been in school for like 7 or 8 years at this point, like another year. And yet looking back, when you do what you love, then it really, time doesn't seem to be as relevant in terms of the conversation anymore. And I think for me, I noticed that when I was doing the previous research, my energy levels, how excited I felt about the work that I was doing was much lower than when I started to study happiness, because I really, my heart was in it. I believed it. And I think that sometimes those are hard decisions to make, but definitely worth the effort.
Oh yeah. So as a scientist, I'm going to ask you, what is the science behind happiness? It looks like there's science that you can become happy. Is that the right term? You can teach yourself how to be happy or happier?
Yeah, I like to think about it like cultivating more happiness in our life. I one of the big things, the first things that I was really surprised to learn when I started studying happiness, I always thought like, I will be happy when I graduate, when I this. And I quickly realized that happiness isn't a destination. It's not something that we arrive at. It's a practice. It's a skill that we learn. And then when I got more into the research, one of the first sort of science of happiness pieces that was a big piece of the equation in terms of my understanding was that there is a genetic element to happiness, absolutely. And researchers can actually do twin studies where they find genetically identical twins that are separated at birth. And then they can start to compare some of the differences. So yes, there's a genetic component, and there's also an environmental component, right? And this isn't surprising news, especially this past year, where we know that when our environment changes, it affects how we feel. And then there's also another part, and that's the piece that's up to us. So that's our thoughts, our actions, and our own behaviors. And research has shown that when we focus on that, and when we see happiness like a skill that we can build over time, we can actually be happier. So no matter how happy or unhappy we're feeling right now, each and every one of us has the capacity to sort of build the skill of happiness. Or I think about it sometimes like a muscle. You got to use it to get stronger. And knowing that it's possible, and that there's a lot of it that's within our control. Our thoughts, our actions, and our behaviors are in our control. Environment and genetics, not as much, right? So my work focuses on that element of happiness, the piece that we can focus on, and knowing that we can actually see meaningful change, not only in terms of how we feel, but even in terms of our physical health, our work, our relationships. To me, I think that that's really exciting and cool.
So give me some of the tools then. What are some takeaways? How can we help ourselves?
So the first one I want to share with you is the one, I did a study at Western, at the university where I did my PhD with undergraduate students. And so in this study, every week for 4 weeks, the students would watch YouTube videos, and they would teach them skills to build their happiness muscle. And at the end of my study, I was going to do focus groups, but then the timing of the exams got into exam time. So we did written interviews. And the students, I said, what was your favorite thing you learned? Out of all the skills that you learned, what was your favorite? And so the vast majority said gratitude. And I love this because one, gratitude is becoming very much a regular part of our conversation, I find. And by practicing gratitude, it really, all it is taking time to think about things that we're grateful for, that we're thankful for, that we appreciate. And I love this because it doesn't cost anything. It can be done anywhere, and it doesn't take a lot of time. And yet the research is really clear that it can have meaningful impact in terms of how happy we feel. If we think about things that we're grateful for, that's really good. And in best case scenario, we actually take the time to write them down, whether that be pen to paper, or if you type it on your computer, or even use an app. But the physical act of putting words down helps to increase the profound impact that the gratitude can have. The thing about gratitude, though, that I think is important to also keep in mind is it's not like one day you're not grateful and then you practice gratitude and you wake up and you're grateful. It's a process, and just like happiness, it's something that we work at, and over time we get better at it. And as we get better at it and practice it more, we start to see more benefits. Another really big one, I think, especially in today's day and age, to know, research out of Harvard actually found that the number one predictor of both our long-term health and our happiness is social connection. And I think that especially in this year where we've had to physically be more distant than ever, it's important to know that the connection is still really critical. And, research has shown that loneliness can be as bad for our health as alcoholism, smoking, or obesity. And I actually just read a study last week because I was wondering, how much of the connection do we lose? Like when you see a friend and you give them a hug, I was curious how much of that translates online. Talking right now, right here, and I feel connected, but how much more or less connected would I feel if we were actually sitting across from each other?
Right.
And so I just read a study that came out that found that it's about 80%. So yes, it still has a very meaningful opportunity to connect. So I thought that was kind of cool.
That is cool. And this also reminds me of other studies. I'm a big foodie, so I'm really into food and the Mediterranean diet. And the countries that are they called the blue zones, where people live like 95, 99 years old. And I remember they did the study on the island in Greece, Ikaria, it's called, where people live a very long time. And they thought that it was linked to the food. And then when they did more research, they found that they all had friendships. They all had long-lasting friendships. And it was hard to get one-on-one interviews with a lot of people in this village because they were always so social. They were outside at the cafes, they had friends. And so it speaks to that point that you said, that, that connection, being with people, really affects your happiness and your overall mental health and well-being.
That's so interesting. Yeah. And I remind myself all the time, you don't have to be close to feel close.
Now that gratitude, writing things down, does that work with kids? Would you encourage children to also write down things that they're grateful for at the end of the day?
Yeah, absolutely. There's this window of opportunity with childhood, where when you can establish and create healthy habits, you're more likely to continue them into adulthood. Gratitude is really great skill to have and to cultivate early in life, because then you get the benefits for longer and you're more likely to do it in adulthood. One of the activities that's really fun, especially if you want to do with a family, is either at the breakfast table or the dinner table, whatever meal you sit down together, is going around and sharing something that you're grateful for, whether it be something you're grateful for that day or people, but it allows you to have that conversation as a family and to work the practice into something you're doing already.
Would you say it's bad or unhealthy to feel sad?
No.
Right.
No. And I love that you asked this question, because a lot of times, especially before the pandemic, I do a lot of media. And so usually before or after, I'll be chit-chatting with the person interviewing me, and they'll say, "Oh, you're a happiness researcher. You must be happy all the time." and I always say, no, I'm not happy all the time. And I also don't want to be. And I don't want my parents to be, or my siblings to be, or my friends, because the goal in life is not to be happy all the time. And there's actually research that shows that people that their sole purpose in life, like they have their blinders on and all they focus on is being happy, those people are actually less happy. So happiness is a part of life, and it's a really great part, but it's not the total part. And I also, with sadness, I thought, as a happiness researcher, one of my goals when I first started studying happiness was I wanted to figure out how to not feel some of the challenging emotions I felt. I didn't want to feel sad. I didn't want to feel anxiety. I didn't want to feel down. I didn't want to feel angry. I wanted to get rid of all of those and just be happy all the time. And I thought, well, you're a scientist, you're a researcher. This is what you're trained to do, is figure out these questions. And what I started to realize was that you can actually be happy and sad at the same time. That's called the bittersweet emotion. And happiness and sadness are actually separate constructs. So you can be more happy and less happy, more sad and less sad. So they're not the same thing. And in terms of like healthy psychological functioning, we actually need, the full spectrum of human emotions. It's what makes us human. I often think about it like, if you look at a sheet of music, say, for example, like a sheet of Beethoven's music, and it sounds beautiful, and you look at all the notes on the page, this is sort of how I see happiness, where if the song was just one high note the whole page, it wouldn't even sound good, right? It's a long, continuous tone. We actually need high moments, low moments, spaces in between moments to breathe.
Pauses.
And that's what collectively makes a beautiful song. I think that's kind of the same perspective that I look about happiness, is that that's what collectively makes a beautiful life.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, actually. I love that. The
Mm-hmm.
highs and the lows and the pauses and all of it, right?
Right. And then it takes the pressure off of ourselves, because I think sometimes when we aren't feeling happy, we have a tendency to be hard on ourselves,
Right.
or to feel like, we should be feeling happy. And so to know that we don't need to be happy all the time, and all of these emotions are in terms of our healthy psychological functioning important. What happens is, though, as you start to build the skill of happiness, like I talked about, that muscle,
Right.
is that your happiness muscle starts to grow. And as that happens, your highs get higher and your lows get higher. So everything sort of up levels, and that's the direction of how it works. And then the question becomes not, I don't want to feel those down moments. It's more about not marinating in them for a really extended period of time. And when we are feeling sad and we want to cry, then we cry. It's when we bottle things up or don't express them that we can get into trouble. But it's actually quite healthy to feel those expressions. I think we can think of times in our life where we had a big cry and we felt good afterwards, because it was such a release, for example.
So then I'm going to ask you something a little bit different culturally. Is it different? Because you talked about bottling up. Like, I come from a very loud Greek family. We don't bottle anything up. When you're crying, you're crying. When you're angry, and everybody knows. I'm just wondering if it's different culturally, what happiness means in other cultures or how they show it.
This is actually, it's such an interesting, I was just reading a couple papers yesterday morning about this, because I was curious. And so happiness actually varies across cultures, especially if I was reading some papers looking at, in North America versus in Asia. And first of all, the idea of happiness and the definition, the way we define it, is different in America. North America, it tends to be more pleasure driven, sort of the happiness that we see in marketing. And it focuses on the individual. When you look overseas, in Asia, for example, a lot of their culture is more about collective. And so they're doing a lot of research right now looking at, say, gratitude, for example. We have a ton of evidence in North America, or even the UK, Australia, that gratitude increases happiness. And so now they're trying to apply it in other settings, in other cultures, in Africa, to see, does that work the same way? And even another one that's really linked to happiness, especially in North America, is this idea of like progress or goal attainment, feeling like you're working towards a goal. And yet overseas, they're not seeing the same benefits in terms of happiness when they focus on that, because it's a very different orientation of the culture, whereas we're more self-focused over here in North America. So there are cultural differences. We're just sort of starting to scratch the surface in the research in terms of what they are and how they're different. And I think it's a really exciting field to be in, because there's so many questions to learn and to understand and to see all across the world in terms of what's similar and what's different.
Oh, it's fascinating. I find it completely fascinating. I'm going to switch gears just a little bit. I was thinking about happiness, and it made me think about a movie that I love, 20th Century Women, starring Annette Bening. And she says, her son asks her, "Mom, are you happy?" And her response was, "Wondering if you're happy is a great shortcut to just being depressed." And it also reminded me of, we have a philosophy book here at home, and John Stuart Mill says the same thing. Ask yourself whether you're happy, you cease to be so. And I'm wondering what your take is on that. Like, should we be questioning ourselves, or is it something, maybe you shouldn't ponder?
You know what is so synchronistic about what you just said? I'm listening to Adam Grant's book right now. It's called Think Again.
Okay.
And it's a really great book. And the entire book is about how to think like a scientist.
Oh.
And it's a really great read. And today, when the chapter that I was listening to, I think it was like chapter 8 or 9, he actually shared that exact quote that you just said.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's funny.
And people that focus on happiness are less happy all the time, are less happy than other people. So I think about happiness as a piece of life, but it's more of a byproduct of doing things that we like, as opposed to an outcome. For me, I think about, this idea of prioritizing positivity, trying to find opportunities in my life to do things that make me happy, and recognizing that it's not the be all end all, and that happiness is something that comes from doing things that we love. And each of us have different things that constitute what that is. And nobody can answer that for us but us. So that's the good news, and that we can figure it out. We can be a scientist of our own happiness, right? We can study ourselves and really start to ask those questions and see what comes.
What about the research that shows that if I'm happy, there's that 3 degrees of separation. So if I'm a happy person, I'm going to make my friend happy. I guess it would be my friend's friend would be happy, right? And when I read this, I had to reflect that, you know, moms and dads, parents, they're always worried about, you know, is my kid happy? Is my spouse happy? Is my mom happy? Is everybody happy? But this research kind of suggests that if I'm happy, if I take care of me, number one, then the happiness will spread to my family. Like, do you agree with that? Or should we take care of ourselves first?
So yes, the study that you're talking about is out of Harvard. It's a really great study, and it shows that 3 degrees of spreading of happiness. One of the things I talk about a lot, oftentimes people feel like it's selfish to focus on your happiness, especially if you have other people to take care of or things like that. We think, let's put other people first, let's do everything else, and then if there's some left at the end, but I want to help other people. And it's very clear in the research that focusing on your happiness is one of the most selfless things that you can do. By putting ourselves in the best possible position, by focusing on how we're feeling, it then puts us in a better place to be with other people.
And do you think this 3 degrees of separation works virtually? Like, now that we're spending so much time on computers, can that happiness spread through the screen?
Yeah, it can. And I think we all can experience that. If we're not sure, think about it. You jump on Zoom and you meet someone, like right now, right? Yes. We're having a great conversation. You're happy. Yeah. I can feel when I get off, I actually feel more energized and happier than when I logged on here today.
Absolutely.
So even there's research that shows that when people are on the telephone, so not even video, on the telephone, if you smile on the other end, the person is more likely to smile.
Is that right?
Yeah, isn't that cool?
That is interesting. That is really interesting. And I want to know what makes you happy on a Sunday afternoon.
What makes me happy right now is jigsaw puzzles. I love them so much. And like, if I have a Sunday off, having a cup of tea and like sorting a puzzle is like my dream right now. Jigsaw puzzling is a great example where I'm able to combine a lot of my passions in unique ways. So yesterday or the day before, I actually did a segment on the Global's national news in the morning. And I talked about hobbies and how they can improve our happiness. And I shared some research that really talked about how doing things that we enjoy, hobbies, whatever they are, whether it's gardening, puzzles, anything, can actually have an impact on our happiness while we're doing it. But we also see things like lower heart rates and stress levels hours later. Wow. So I got to take my love of jigsaw puzzling and share it with the world, and share some research to let people know that, you know what, it's actually a really good activity.
Well, it's very calming. It can be very calming. This has been wonderful. And after this conversation, I am going to do the 3 things a day. My kids bought me that book at Christmas and it's been empty beside my bed, but you have motivated me. I'm going to fill the pages. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on. I enjoyed our conversation so much.
That's great. Thanks, Gillian. Take care.